further. Then, Simon, there's so many permutations that could be at play here, and it really could go in any direction. But in the end, it's about striking a deal. A man who says he's been the founder of the art of the deal here. Which one do you think will come out on top?
I think it is absolutely, completely unpredictable, Arabile, and that is because President Donald Trump is completely unpredictable. President Ramaphosa yesterday talking to media outside the South African embassy in Washington. He was there wargaming his plans for this make or break meeting with Donald Trump, was exuding confidence about the outcome, thought that an agreement could be struck, and continued to frame all of this as a potential positive for trade ties between the United States and South Africa, and for the more than 600 American businesses already doing business in South Africa. We know that he's taking some star power into the Oval Office with him. The golfers Ernie Els and Retief Goosen, Ernie Els reportedly having played a pivotal role in persuading Donald Trump to accept the idea of a face-to-face meeting with President Ramaphosa. He's also going to be taking Johan Rupert, the business leader, into the White House with him. So he's hoping that the delegation that he brings into the Oval Office will be able to help him persuade the American president that some of the claims that he and his Secretary of State Marco Rubio have been making about South Africa, namely that there is an unreported genocide taking place in the country, that Afrikaners are actively having their farms expropriated without compensation under the terms of the Expropriation Act. President Ramaphosa and that entire delegation prepared to push back against those claims voiced by the American leader. But everything is unpredictable in the sense that the president of South Africa has to be ready for President Trump potentially to ambush him in exactly the same way as President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance ambushed Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine back in February. And there is no question that part of the wargaming that the South African delegation will have done, I think, is to prepare for the possible consequences of a meeting shown live on camera, because remember, that is what Donald Trump likes to do, potentially going sour. I have to say that the mood music in Washington going into this meeting was not particularly encouraging in terms of what was taking place yesterday on Capitol Hill. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was asked by Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, a reliable Trump ally, whether he could explain how the US government was going to deal with what Senator Cruz characterized as South Africa's presence on the world stage as a malign actor. The Secretary of State did not push back on that characterization of South Africa and chose to answer Senator Cruz's questions this way.
First of all, we chose not to participate in this year's G20 hosted by South Africa, either at the foreign minister level or the president's level. And it had a lot to do with some of these issues, in addition to some of the issues they brought on their agenda, which we don't think reflect the priorities of this administration. So the president of South Africa is here today because he says he endeavors to reset relations between our countries. And President Trump, if someone says that, is always going to be open to resetting relations. But it will have to touch on some of the issues just pointed to now. Obviously, the position they've adopted towards Israel is way, not just off balance, but completely geared towards one side. And it makes one wonder about these allegations that are out there now of foreign influence, including with Iran. They clearly, on the global stage, and multiple multinational organizations have consistently been a vote against America's interests. But when one country is consistently unaligned with the United States on issue after issue after issue after issue, now you have to make conclusions about it.
How does their campaign against Israel undermine America?
Well, I think, first of all, because it echoes some of the charges that are being made by some of the biggest enemies of Israel that happen to be ours. Whether it's Iran, whether it's these radical groups that chant death to America, death to Israel. So we're very concerned about that. I also think there's real concern in our mind about some of these international institutions that, frankly, South Africa has lined up strongly behind, who would seek to, if they could, jail, imprison, indict American office holders because of some of the positions we've taken on public policy, even though we're not members to the conventions that create these entities. So if you talk about these groups they are in essence utilizing their forum on the national stage as a nation state under this president and this leadership to echo the claims and the positions taken by not just Iran, but in many cases China as well.
And some absolutely explosive revelations contained within those answers from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. You heard him right at the beginning there say that the decision had been made by President Trump not to attend the G20 Leaders Summit in South Africa in November, that President Ramaphosa will be hosting in Johannesburg. That is the first time that either the Secretary of State or the White House have actually confirmed that there is an intention now by President Trump to boycott that G20 summit at the leadership level. Remember, the only boycotts we've seen so far are by the Secretary of State and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who stayed away from some preparatory meetings within the last few weeks. So trying to persuade President Trump to change his mind about that gets added to President Ramaphosa's agenda, and he's also got to push back on those claims that were articulated there by Marco Rubio, that South Africa is essentially in cahoots with China and Iran to advance an anti-American agenda on the world stage. So as I say, the mood music in Washington ahead of the meeting, certainly not as positive as some of the expressions that we've heard about this face-to-face encounter with President Trump from President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Is it fair to say then, Simon, that expectations are pretty low, considering where the relationship stands, and that ambushes have often been par for the course, to use the golf analogy here, because there will be so many golfers in the room as well, and that it may be difficult to get to an actual win, but that this may pave the way to an ultimate win at some stage, because relations would have perhaps been reset and an understanding would have possibly come to the fore. Is that the sense you're getting?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you used the golf analogy, because I actually think the presence of those golfers, Ernie Els and Retief Goosen, and also Johan Rupert, of course, leading international business person in the room, that's a move by President Ramaphosa to kind of distract the president's attention away from some of the more really contentious issues on the agenda, because we know Donald Trump loves golf, we know that he's got a warm personal relationship with Ernie Els, and we know that in Johan Rupert he will see a business person who, like Donald Trump, is all about the art of the deal. It's not quite the same as the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer sitting in the Oval Office and pulling out of his pocket the invitation from King Charles to make a state visit to the UK. But it certainly is an effort, I think, to kind of change the atmosphere in the room, warm it up, bring people in that Donald Trump may enjoy communicating with. But at the end of the day, you know, America is a country that has already accepted Afrikaner refugees, granting them a fast track to American citizenship. Marco Rubio said earlier this week, more will soon be on their way. The president himself and the Secretary of State have continued to insist there is a genocide taking place in South Africa. President Trump says it exists, but the media is engaged in a conspiracy not to report it. I mean, you can have as many golfers and business people as you like in the room. You've got to find a way of overcoming American policy that the South African government argues is being based on disinformation. Yeah. And that's going to be the biggest challenge. If President Ramaphosa can find a way of threading the needle and overcoming that hurdle, maybe that reset can actually occur.
Yeah, Simon, have you heard any word with regards to this deal reportedly with regards to Starlink possibly being offered as a contract to Elon Musk to perhaps soften things up a little bit as well before that meeting? And also, just very quickly, have we reached a new level of diplomacy where the appeal, the trickery, the pageantry needs to look slightly different in order to appeal to leaders like Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, on the issue of Elon Musk, Mr. Musk, as you know, within the last 48 hours has again been accusing South Africa of racism because it has shut, he says, Starlink out of South Africa. The South African government, of course, argues that there are ways for Elon Musk to operate in South Africa, but he's got to adhere to the black economic empowerment rules of the road, something that Elon Musk very much recoils against. It did occur to me that a possible masterstroke for President Ramaphosa, instead of pulling out a letter from the king from his pocket, might be to pull out a Starlink license from his pocket in the Oval Office. That might, of course, help warm relations, but, you know, there are still huge BEE issues to contend with regard to Mr. Musk's desire. On the pageantry, you know, what is so different about the Trump presidency from all the other presidents that we've witnessed is his determination to turn these Oval Office encounters with visiting foreign heads of government and heads of state into made-for-TV reality programs. You know, the business partly now gets conducted not behind closed doors, but even before they go into closed-door conversation, in these impromptu press conferences that take place in the White House. It's a pageant. There is danger in those impromptu press conferences for President Ramaphosa and other visitors, but there is also opportunity. So it'll be interesting to see when this meeting happens, the extent to which all the preparations and the presence of those other guests in the room pays any dividends.
So, picture this. President Cyril Ramaphosa lands in Washington, D.C. with his signature calm smile, briefcase of big ideas, and a whole nation of South Africans holding their breath. Why? Because today, he's meeting none other than Donald Trump. Yes, that Donald Trump. And according to Newsroom Africa's U.S. correspondent Simon Marks, this meeting is, brace yourself, unpredictable. Which, in diplomatic terms, basically means, we have no idea if this will end with a handshake or a tweet storm. Now let's just pause and appreciate the build-up here. You've got Ramaphosa, who's been working overtime to attract investment, restore trust, and reposition South Africa on the world stage. And then you've got Trump, a man who once said he loves Africa, but couldn't name a single African country unless it involved a golf course or a controversial tweet. It's like pairing jazz with heavy metal and hoping for a duet. What could go wrong? Simon Marks, who's been tracking US politics for years, says this is the kind of meeting where literally anything could happen. One moment they're talking trade deals and bilateral cooperation, the next Trump could be offering Ramaphosa real estate tips or asking why South Africa doesn't have a Trump Tower yet. And you might laugh, but this meeting actually carries serious weight. South Africa and the US share over $20 billion in trade annually. They collaborate on everything from health to education to renewable energy. So this isn't just a photo op. Ramaphosa's got real goals. Secure investment, address AGOA uncertainties, and maybe smooth over some frayed diplomatic edges that got a little rough under the last few years of, shall we say, creative, US foreign policy. But let's not forget that South Africa hasn't exactly been America's pet project lately. From disagreements over Ukraine, to Pretoria's independent foreign policy stance, there's been tension. And with Trump now back in the spotlight, unpredictability isn't just a possibility, it's practically the dress code. Simon Marks says insiders don't even have a clear agenda for this meeting. It's more vibes than vision right now, which is wild, considering these are two global powers trying to build a future together. But then again, this is the Trump era 2.0, expecting a straight line is like expecting load shedding to follow a schedule. Still, there's hope. Ramaphosa's known for his ability to keep his cool, even in the most chaotic rooms. He's dealt with strikes, party drama, and ESCOM board meetings, so talking to Trump. Child's play, really. If anyone can bring order to the unpredictable, it's him. And let's be honest, the optics of this meeting are gold. South Africa's president standing tall in Washington, showing the world that Mzansi isn't just a country watching from the sidelines, we're in the game. Whether it's investment, respect, or just getting a decent quote on solar panels, Ramaphosa knows what's at stake. So now, all eyes are on DC. The world waits to see if this meeting will be a turning point, a diplomatic dance, or just another chapter in the long, bizarre book of international relations. Whatever happens, one thing is certain: it won't be boring. And as Simon Marx said, when unpredictability is the headline, buckle up. Because this story is just getting started.